Cup Series race. Here are your hosts, Kevin Bedstone, NASCAR Sky, and Jeff Davis.
Welcome back, race fans. Another episode of Mash the Gas podcast. My name is Kevin Batstone. Joining me shortly, Miss NASCAR Sky, and of course, Mr. Jeff Davis. We're here to break down all of the action from the Straight Talk Wireless 500 at the Phoenix Raceway. It was hot down in the desert, a lot of caution flags, lots to unpack here, Jeff. Who mashed the gas the hardest this weekend?
Well, you know, it was the wild, wild west when we go out to Phoenix, and you got to give it up to the number 12 of Ryan Blaney. He got his first win of the year, his second at Phoenix, and his 18th career win. He led 28 laps, so you got to give it up to the 12 and Penske for the weekend, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, it was just a historic weekend for Penske altogether with the doubleheader with IndyCar. I believe they won two poles in both races, and then won both races. So that's awesome for Team Penske. Obviously, as a Team Penske fan myself, I'm pretty impressed. Yeah, I mean, Newgarden is super talented, so it doesn't surprise me there. And Blaney, I mean, what a drive. He started back at the field twice or something like that. It was just absolute craziness. But we've seen Blaney do this before. He almost reminds me of we used to call Kevin Harvick the closer. I just feel like Blaney's the new closer.
For sure. And he had to earn that win all day long, all day strong, like you mentioned, Sky. Went to the back twice, pit road error, loose wheel. I mean, everything that could go wrong in that 12 camp went wrong. Got stuck on the outside of one of the restarts. Somehow managed to avoid a lot of those wrecks. But Team Penske, you'd mentioned they were celebrating 60 years down there in Scottsdale. Joseph Newgarden goes out, wins the IndyCar race. And look, the 22 and the 2 were up there all day, but both got caught up in some absolute mayhem. We saw the 22 get into it with Chastain, got taken out there later in the race. Hard hit for Austin Cindric. That was one of the hardest hits, Jeff, I think I've ever seen in Phoenix.
Yeah, I felt bad for Austin Cindric. He was actually running really, really well, so it's kind of bummed out to see him get taken out there. And, I know Joey Logano kind of stuck his nose in maybe a little too much, but I do think Ross Chastain kind of slowed down a little bit when he came up there off turn one throughout the dog leg. And, 22 just got caught up in it. So I don't know if really anyone's at fault there. But as far as Ryan Blaney goes, man, this guy is amazing at Phoenix. I mean, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, he's finished first, second, fifth, second, fourth. Only one he had bad was in March of 2025, and that was an engine failure where he finished P28. But since 2021, he has finished in the top 5 every single race in Phoenix. So definitely props to Ryan Blaney. Just a really great race. And I kind of felt bad for Ty Dillon there or not Ty Dillon, Ty Gibbs. I was like, this could be one of his first races. I think in 121 starts, somewhere right around there. I was kind of pulling for him a little bit. So I was a little bummed out that he couldn't pull it off.
Yeah, Ty Gibbs is definitely showing some improvement. That's 2 back-to-back, I think, 4th place finishes for him. So that's super impressive. He seems to be doing pretty good. It's interesting because Chase Briscoe is really low in the points. You think that they would usually be flipped. Not that I'm too worried about Briscoe. I'm sure he'll get it together. It's you gotta keep strong and keep fighting. But I didn't think he was going to win the race, especially not with the cars that were around him because they just have more experience. But I definitely think that he's definitely going to steal through and get one. And I wanted to mention the Logano wrecks. They definitely were both just racing incidents, but I do think that's a really good example of what goes around comes around. He definitely maybe was driving a little too hard there with Ross and then ended up having his day ended by Dinger. It comes and goes. And I feel bad for Cindric. You got to be careful getting caught up in too many people's accidents because especially with the new system where you can't just win your way in. He can't rely on just sneaking a win in early in the season and going from there. You got to start really honing in and avoiding these wrecks for sure.
Absolutely. There was a lot of chaos out there to be avoided yesterday. I mean, we tied a record 12 caution flags, most since 2014. I thought we were going to go, overtime or maybe get a couple extras there at the end, but they were able to keep their noses clean. But a lot of torn up race cars there. This new horsepower package definitely proving to be a little bit more of a handful, but this is exactly what the drivers wanted. We saw the cars sliding loose, getting through the corner, putting that power down. We saw Ryan Blaney was able to rotate the inside lanes so much better through 1 and 2 than anybody in the field. And that's really what gave him the advantage. I mean, Christopher Bell, when he got out front, was gone, lights out fast. Blaney was the only guy that could run him down, and those guys were battling hard there. And it was almost like a little bit of deja vu, kind of flipped the scripts for Christopher Bell. Comes down, takes 2 tires. Oh, that's what Denny Hamlin did back in November, lost the race. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened to Seabell. But had that race gone about another 6-7 laps green, Jeff, I think the 20 would have got him.
The 20 win in the last two races in Phoenix, and him having that 8 second lead is like 8.5 seconds on Blaney. I didn't think he was going to be able to catch up with him. I mean, there were like 12 laps to go. 8.5 seconds in the lead was Christopher Bell, but Blaney just pulls it off. I mean, again, I think Phoenix is one of his best tracks. The only person I could think of better was, Kevin Harvick. I know he was obviously up in the booth this weekend, but he's got the most wins in Phoenix of any driver. He's got 9 wins in Phoenix. So, I think Blaney, he might be able to beat those statistics. But, I'm sitting here looking at a picture right now of that wreck between the 22 kind of getting into the one kind of coming up on him. And boy, again, Austin Cindric, he took a lick on that. That was really a hard hit in the wall. And I also felt bad for Anthony Alfredo. I mean, filling in for Bowman in the 48 car. And Bowman, man, he's going to have some work to do because his contract is up this year. He's the only one of the Hendrick organization that does not have a contract at least through the end of next year. As we know, Kyle Larson signed one through 2031, but he's like dead last in points, I believe. So he really needs to get his act together if he's going to be with Mr. H next year, Kevin.
Well, and he's got a lot of work to do there, Jeff. I mean, we saw him get out of the race car at COTA early, and we found out that the reason he was sidelined this weekend had nothing to do with the heat in COTA or whatever he had going on that day. He's been suffering from vertigo. Anthony Alfredo took the call, stepped into the race car, ended up getting caught up in some of the mess there a little bit later. But you're right. I mean, with this new points format, Christopher Bell talked about it before Phoenix. 1 or 2 wins can really catapult your way back into a good points position. I mean, last week when Sky and I were going over the points, at the time, Reddick had a 70-point advantage over his teammate in second place in points. With that Ryan Blaney win and that, the extra stage points and the 15 points for winning, he now finds himself in second in points, 60 points behind Reddick. So, but for Reddick, good point stake, just kind of maintain it, cushion it, protect it. And we were talking about this, the point spread. I mean, 109 points to SVG, which I think deserves a shout out for finishing P11 here in Phoenix. We've talked about his oval package needing to improve. He sits in fifth in points. But then when you look from fifth on back, super tight, all the way back to 20th, 21st. That's a much narrower window than what we see in the top five.
Another thing I also thought was interesting is the only two drivers so far this year to finish in the top 15 in all four races is Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace. I mean, that's pretty darn cool, Sky. What do you think?
That's exactly what I was going to mention because Bubba was involved, and I think the I can't remember which Logano wreck that he was involved in, but he was involved in one of them, and he still finished P6. That's really impressive. I mean, that's the type of consistency that you're going to need in this type of format. It might not always be flashy, but you have to finish and you have to finish well. And same thing for the 45. I mean, they're both strong and consistent right now. I mean, I don't know. 2311 is scary this year. That's all I'm going to say.
They're really kicking ass, and it's amazing. And to Kevin's point a minute ago with SVG, I mean, he's number 5 in point standings right now. Yeah, he's 109 points back, but that's because, Tyler Reddick's got so many points up in the lead. But, if he keeps up what he's doing, to Kevin's point a minute ago, man, his oval package is getting better. And he is one of those drivers that is so good that he knows what he was bad at. And I think he did a lot of work in the off season. And so to see him literally 5th place in points right now, and with the road courses coming up, he just needs a couple wins. And there's a good chance he'll make the top 16.
Yeah, I think I'll go on record to say SVG does make the chase. Where he'll be seated, that'll kind of to be decided as we get through the road courses. And I still think it's very possible that if we get on a technical track like Martinsville, Richmond, some of these, flat 1 milers that kind of play into the hands of the road course guys with a lot of heavy braking, throttle management, I think you could find SVG in victory lane on an oval for sure. But the points are very important, and we're seeing that quickly. You mentioned 2311. Those guys, they have found a way to be consistent. Bubba Wallace, of course, hanging around, just getting good stage points, good finishes. Riley Herbst, I'm not sold on yet, in this camp. I don't know if they're just wrong place, wrong time. We talked about Trackhouse. Ross Chastain, I think, would have had a much better finish had that incident with Joey Logano not occurred. We saw Connor Zilic. Connor's just kind of, I think, shaking off some of the rookie cobwebs, if you will. Kind of tagged the wall there in qualifying. You made a couple mistakes, spun the car around, but I do think this 88 is going to continue to improve, and I think he's in a good position to take Rookie of the Year.
That's someone, when we were talking about the points a little bit ago and we were mentioning Bowman, like you can't, we got to take the points. It's only a couple races in, but the reason I worry for someone like Bowman is because you don't see him win as much. Um, you can see Connor Zillage is in 34th. I'm not as concerned about someone like him or somebody like Chase Briscoe that I mentioned earlier in 33rd, because they're drivers that I see definitely winning this year. And like I said, you're going to go on record with SVG, and I agree with you. I think that whatever Trackhouse has done, I mean, they have stepped it up. Both, like, I feel like 2311 and Trackhouse have really like stepped up and been like, it's no longer just the top three. We're also here to compete. We're here to compete at a really, really high level. They've been better than Hendrick this year, honestly. It's honestly just insane, and I really like that for Trackhouse. I'm excited to see where these drivers go. I feel like they have good drivers and drivers that are just very different, and I like that about them.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, and that's just performance. And we talked about it the last couple of weeks. Getting to Phoenix was going to give us that measuring stick, and of course, then getting to the mile and a half in Las Vegas next week, we'll see even more. But one thing I took away from this race, Jeff, was Hendrick Motorsports was lacking on speed for sure, and that's not something that we're used to seeing. We know that it's been kind of a Penske Toyota track for a long time, but we're used to seeing Hendrick Motorsports at least up in the mix. I mean, Kyle Larson even said it. Qualified really well, did not like his car in practice. And Hendrick across the board, I mean, we saw Chase Elliott there have to use up 6, 7 sets of tires and kind of drag that out. And Alan Gustafson said, hey, we got to take the track position we can get it. And then the nines day just went completely south from there. So HMS, I think, has a little bit of work to do from what we saw this weekend, but we know how dominant they can be in Vegas.
And Chase Elliott, he came in and got an extra set of tires, and that's why he had to stay out towards the end. I think it was the second to the last caution, because he didn't have an extra set unless he were to go in and put on his scuffs, which maybe he should have done. His scuffs from qualifying, because they only ran one lap. So Hendrick, yeah, they just did not have the speed that I expected him to. Other than Kyle Larson, you have to admit, he got a speeding penalty on pit road, goes to the back of the line, P35, and what does he do? Comes out and finishes P3. So, Kyle Larson is just one of those drivers that can do that. And I was also really surprised about the 77. I know old Hurricane Hocevar, man, he had some adjustments and started at the rear of the field at the beginning of the race. And he got up there in the top 6 or 7, right around there, during the race. Made his way up there, didn't finish quite where he did, but it was still kind of cool to see someone. I like seeing drivers when they're in the very back and they march all the way to the front. Same thing kind of happened with Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch twice had a tire go down, got into the wall a little bit on one of those, was a lap down, got the free lap on there, and he wound up in the like 8th position for quite a while. And overall, I was like, man, seeing some of these guys do what they do from the back of the field to come up. And then, of course, incidents happen, towards the end of the race, and they don't finish where they want. But still, some of these drivers are doing a really good job at this.
Well, it's just capitalizing on opportunities, right? I mean, we had 22 race cars involved in some sort of on-track incident. We were mentioning Hendrick. I mean, the 24 of William Byron had a pretty rough day. The fact that he was able to salvage a top 10, where he was, I ended up putting him in my garage in fantasy. I'm like, 24 is cooked. There's no way he's going to get a top 10 out of this. And
Yep.
I was wrong.
Yeah, I didn't think it was either. I put him in my garage just like you did, Kevin, and that's what we do in fantasy. It all comes on that second stage at the end when it's like, you got to make a choice now, and you're only halfway through the race, so that's what it is. But I think Hendrick did struggle. But when I was looking at some numbers after the race yesterday, I was just flipping through some stats. Overall, at Phoenix, Hendrick has won the most races in Phoenix than any other organization. It just hasn't happened that much in the last 5 to 8 years. I think you're right. The other organizations have kind of taken over, with Joe Gibbs and especially with Penske drivers.
Well, and there's a couple factors we got to think there with Phoenix. One of which is it comes down to a championship, or has for many years. We now know that that's gone away, which we're fortunate for. We talk about the Gen 7 car. I think that Toyota and Penske figured that out a little bit quicker than Hendrick for whatever the reason at Phoenix. Kevin Harvick talked about his 9 wins, but that was a different time. We reconfigured Phoenix Raceway back in 2019. Chase Elliott did win his championship there in 2020 before we moved on to, and then Kyle Larson backed it up in 2021. And then Penske said, hey, we're going to take it from here. But that's Phoenix. And we finally got our hands around what this horsepower package is going to look like. I like it. I think this is what we've been asking for. These cars are sliding around a little bit. The drivers wanted a little bit more throttle, and we saw it. We saw the passes that were needing to be made. I mean, at one point we saw Blaney give the chrome horn to the 20. Christopher Bell got him up the hill a little bit and was going to take that position before the caution came out.
Yeah, if that caution would have came out, I think you would have passed him right there. I mean, we were talking maybe less than a foot of lead for the 20. And I was like kind of bummed out a little bit. I was like, man, that would have been he was trying the top, he was trying the bottom, he did everything, and Christopher Bell was just mirror driving, as they were saying on the on the broadcast, and that's exactly what he's doing. He was just trying to ride the same line so he could take the position away from him where he couldn't get the pass. And there were a lot of tire issues this race, and I don't know if it's a very flat track, so I know they had a little bit of a softer compound on the tire. But we saw a lot of tire failures. I mean, between Josh Berry and Kyle Busch, SVG, we lots of tire failures. Now, was it because it was too soft of a compound, or was it because some of the carnage and the what, like we call it, the miscellaneous debris, the miscellaneous debris that we see out there on the track? Were they picking up stuff off the track that was making those tires go down, or did Goodyear just bring a shitty tire?
Well, I think Sky was a little bit of both. I think we saw in that caution kind of mid race, we had four tires go down under that yellow, and they said the track was dirty, and they were picking up a lot of the brake rotor that had exploded and was cutting down a lot of tires. But it was also hot. It was hot and slick. That's going to put tire wear on. We have extra horsepower. That load on that right rear tire, it's just a package of where we're at. And I think that the teams are going to learn from it. We have the SMT data on it, and I guarantee when we get back to Phoenix in October, we're going to see a little bit of a different race.
I agree. I think it's going to be different in October, and I do think that the Toyotas are probably going to win there in the fall. I just think that they're so dominant there. You look back to last year. If it hadn't been for that caution, Hamlin would definitely be a champion. I did want to say, I wanted to give a shout out because I think it's pretty impressive. Eric Jones, I mean, I'm pretty sure he had to go to the back of the field, or he had some sort of issue, like some penalty or something. I can't quite remember. But he finished in the top 10. I mean, that's pretty impressive, especially for that entire organization. I'm impressed with that. I wanted to give him a little shout out.
Yeah, he did get a P10. That was super cool. But kind of go back to the tires a little bit. I want to go over something else as well. Okay, we there was I know that rotor just shattered, and it was just because of the heat mainly. So that probably did cause a few of the tires. We saw a few others that go down. But one of our listeners actually contacted me. His name's CT. He's actually from my neck of the woods up here in North Dallas. And he had a question about basically the lugs. And I'm not a big fan of the single lug. I think we're on our third, fourth year on it now. I'm still not a fan of it. I still wish we had five. But he reached out to us and said, hey, here's my question for the show. The 12 had a loose left rear tire lug and stopped in the 22 pit where they tightened it. Of course, they are team cars. And he said, and Sky's heroes. I'm a crew dirt track racing. We will help any car that stops in the hot pit, even when guys don't really like it. What's the etiquette in NASCAR? Say the 24 or the 54 had a loose wheel. Could or would they stop in the 22's pit for them to tighten it, or vice versa? And he said, I think the answer would be an empathetic hell no. So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
To me, I feel like if it's the same team, same manufacturer, they're probably always going to help. Um, maybe if it's like one of the last two pit stalls and it's a different manufacturer, a different team, maybe they'll help depending on the year. If it's like a deep run in the chase, you're probably not getting any help. But I do feel like most Fords are going to help Fords, most Toyotas are going to help Toyotas, because ultimately the reason we don't want the tires to come off because we want everybody to be safe. So I feel like most teams or most manufacturers, everyone's going to try to work together to keep it safe.
Sky, what do you think about the single lug? Kevin and I, when we went to Phoenix a few years ago. It was the championship race. It was the last year that they had the five lugs or the five nuts on there, and at the end of the race, they were the Monster Energy girls were kind of handing them out, and Kevin and I each got one. I'm like, man, I've already got a couple from Hendrick Motorsports. But then Kevin brought up a good point. He's like, man, this is the very last year and the very last race that are using multiple lug nuts. Now we're going to a single lug. And we have seen a lot of loose tires over the last few years from this.
Loose tires have always been a thing. I do feel like it's just two different type of situations. I'm not fully against the one singular nug, but would I be mad if we went back to the five? No. I think, the five's nostalgic. As long as I just think it would slow them down at this point. I don't know. It's a lot of give and take, kind of how you want to go about it. I think for me, it would just be kind of whatever's safer and whatever's quickest would probably be the one I would go with. I don't know off the top of my head which one it would be. I think the single lug is quicker. So for my point, I would just go with whatever one is the quickest.
Yeah, which no doubt would be the single wheel. I mean, like we mentioned, Ryan Blaney had a lot of issues, one of which he had to pit in the 22's pit. But here's what I'll say going back to that question, Jeff. The reason that they were able to pull that off was because of where Blaney was pitted. If the roles were reversed and let's say Blaney had the pole, he would have left pit road and been on the racetrack and had no opportunity to come back and pit in a teammate's pit box and get that thing tightened up, and we would have saw some suspensions. So it was just right place, right time for the 12 because if 22 was in that boat, he had the number one pit stall. He would have driven right on the racetrack, tire would have came off, rough deal there. So there's some contingencies there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is lucky because of the pit selection there. You're right, 100%. If it would have been opposite and they were switched up on the pits, it just wouldn't have worked out for him. He would have gone out, and if he would have lost a tire, obviously there's suspensions involved in that, and that's what we do not want to see. And about what was it? I'm trying to remember when we had 5 lug nuts. It was maybe about 5 years before that. So let's say about 8, 9 years ago, there were drivers out there just to make it faster, putting on only 4 lug nuts instead of all 5. And then finally, NASCAR kind of called it out as a safety issue. But there were a number of years where drivers and pit crews were only putting 4 lugs on each one. Now, like to Sky's point, absolutely, you got one single lug. Pit times are a lot shorter. But I still kind of like the old 5 school or the 5 lug nuts, like they do in the Xfinity series. I just think that it makes it a little bit more, complicated for the pit crews a little bit, a little more, get on there and get her done. But I'm just not a big fan of the single lug.
Well, until we see, what NASCAR is going to do with that, is that going to kind of fall under a new rule or the racing to 100% rule where you can only pit inside of your box? I could see that becoming a conversation if this continues to happen week in and week out, because drivers are going to take note of that. If they can usually tell. The left rear tire changer goes, "Hey, I didn't get that tight." He jumps on the radio and says, "Hey, 12 is going to pit in the 22." 20, and you saw when the 12 came in, 22 guys were already walking back to hop over the wall. And they're like, "Wait a minute, we got to turn around and tighten up." Things were happening so quickly that depending on how the season plays out, like Sky said, once we get into the chase, team orders might start to go away once points start to matter more. It's really a case by case basis, and we're kind of seeing it unfold in front of us.
I don't have an issue with it. I personally, for me, I feel that it's the safest option. Like if you can pick, because you still take a penalty. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you just don't get a suspension. I don't know. I feel like it's the best. I feel like NASCAR shouldn't take that option away just because it's the safest. They can, if they can stop, get it put on, nobody gets hurt. The tire's not flying off, someone's not hitting it. It's at least in my opinion. I think that they shouldn't get rid of that.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, Sky, because it does still come with a penalty, Jeff. He did have to start at the tail end of the longest line, but had he have gone on the racetrack and that wheel come off, he would have been a lap or two down, and we would have been talking about suspension. So two very different possible scenarios.
Well, that's exactly what happened to Ross Chastain at Coda, last week. He had a wheel come off, and they had to suspend 2 of their crew members, Josh Appleby and Kenneth Pozega, for the next 2 races. So, well, now they'll be able to compete in Las Vegas. But, that was unfortunate for them. And, I don't know if he had a chance to get in someone else's pit box or not to get that tightened, but an unfortunate situation for Ross Chastain last week.
Quick decisions. I mean, that's what it's going to come down to in those scenarios. So we'll have to see how the single lug, pans out. We've had it for years now, and is this going to become more and more of an issue? We talked a little bit off mic how last year this happened to Bubba Wallace, and he ended up pitting in Chase Briscoe's pit. So not necessarily a team order there, but more of a manufacturer. Toyota's helping the Toyotas. We see that on super speedways. We're going to see those alliances kind of stick together.
Exactly. You and Sky both mentioned it. I think if you have the alliance of even just the manufacturer itself, and there's the eligibility of pulling into one of your own manufacturer's pit stalls, that it would be just fine. Once we get closer to the actual cutoffs and we get later in the season, I don't know if it's going to be just manufacturers as much as it will be just teams. If it's just going to be a Penske thing or a Hendrick thing where it's like, no, you're not stopping in my pit stall. So I think they're probably maybe a little more lenient on it between the teams right now. But when it comes down to that cutoff line for the last few races before the chase, man, I don't think they're going to do it unless you're on the same organization.
That's what I would also thought too. But as I'm sitting here and listening to you, I'm thinking corporations are so strange, and I feel like they prioritize like winning. Like they would rather win, or like a Ford would rather any Ford win. So I think that it would still be like a manufacturer order type thing. Like they would still be like, no, you have to help any Ford person, even in the chase, because we still want, like, we want a Ford person to win. If you don't help this Ford driver now and they get eliminated, well, now a Chevy's gonna win. You know what I mean? At least that's what I think from a corporation standpoint. That's what they would probably think. But I would agree though, as a team, like I feel like yeah, Penske would help Penske, Hendrick would help Hendrick, and that would just kind of be it. But I don't know. Corporations are weird.
Yeah, they are. And I think that this is going to start to play into the pre-race strategy a little bit, where they're having their meetings. Hey, we know where we're pitting. If we run into this scenario, because right, everything's repetition is skill. So if you know you're pitting mid pit road, hey, where is an opportunity if we run into a Blaney situation that we can hop in and get a wheel tightened up real quick? I think you're going to start to see teams practice this. Until NASCAR makes a rule against it, it's free game. And so you got to check every single box. You got to be prepared. And I think, Jeff, that these guys are going to start kind of preparing this based on where their location is on pit road.
And I don't think NASCAR is going to change it because I think they're going to look at it. This is a safety issue. So whether it's a Ford affiliate or just a team affiliate or Penske, whoever, if you can get in there and tighten that up just so that there's a safety, not concerns on safety, that's what NASCAR is probably going to look at. So I don't think they're going to change that. But kind of disguise point a little bit ago about just overall not just the organizations but the manufacturers themselves, whether it's Ford, Toyota, or Chevy. It kind of reminds me of like plate racing or super speedway racing. It's like when you come down to those last few laps, it might not be your teammate, but are you going to push the manufacturer that is in front of you? Yeah, Ford's going to Ford with they're going to line together so they can push each other out, whether they're on the same team or not. And I think that's what we're going to see a little bit with these lugs.
Absolutely. The Fords are going to help the Fords, Toyotas, the Chevys, you name it. Big weekend for Ford. We mentioned that with Indy, for Penske. Pretty cool to be able to do that. I thought it was a very successful crossover weekend, if you will. It was cool to have, some of the Indy guys come up into the booth for stage two. We had Clint Boyer go out and take some pace laps there on the Indy side. And, speaking of the broadcast, I just wanted to touch on something quick with Larry McReynolds. I don't know if you guys caught some of the scuttlebutt with it. He didn't seem 100% all weekend. I don't know if he's got something going on. I don't know if you guys caught it. He just seemed a little bit off. Some said he looked like he had maybe some stroke symptoms. So I hope that's not the case. I love Larry McReynolds. I had dinner with him in Kansas City. He's a fantastic commentator. But there's been a little bit of talk around, is Larry Mack's health okay? And is he going to be able to still call these races?
I sure hope so. I really like the guy. I did hear a little bit in his voice. It just did not sound the same as the normal Larry McReynolds that we know. Especially when he started talking about the tires. It just something seemed a little bit off. So, thoughts and prayers with him. Hopefully, he didn't have a stroke or something like that. Because man, he's always been a good guy. I love him up there in the booth or down on pit road.
Did you notice any of that, Sky? I noticed when they cut the camera to him to kind of open the cup race, he looked not well.
I missed that. I did see all the discourse on social media about it, but I didn't see it personally, and I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much, but I just whatever. I just hope that his health stays good because that would be so sad to see him not commentate anymore because he just I don't know. It's just one of those guys you grow up watching all the time and listening to, and I just I hate getting older.
It is. It's too bad, and hopefully nothing's wrong. Hopefully he's just having a bad day or something. So, props to him no matter what. And another commentator, old Danica Patrick, got the axe today for F1 racing. Not sure on why they cut her. I know she had a little bit of a faux pas throughout the 5 years that she's been doing it. But I saw that on social media as well.
I did. I'm not sure. I'm sure a lot of people could list a few reasons, but we're heading out to Vegas, so maybe she should try her luck out there and see if she can get something going out in Vegas. I'm excited. I've always loved Vegas. I do know that. I mean, looking back last year for the spring race, they Chevy's dominated, so this would be a really great track for Hendrick to kind of start laying the groundwork down for the season and getting it together.
I think Hendrick's going to do pretty good in Las Vegas. I really do. Another note on Danica Patrick, though, and this happened like I think it was her first, or I think it was her very first year that she was in NASCAR. I mean, obviously she didn't do very well, but she was actually the first NASCAR driver that I saw when she hit the wall one time, pull her hands back off the steering wheel and just let it spin until she could grab it and get in control again. And I don't think I've seen any other driver do that until she did it. Now we're seeing it all the time. I saw it yesterday twice where guys are getting hit in the wall, pull their hands back so they don't hurt their wrists or anything with that steering wheel getting just jarred away. But that was Danica's the first one I ever saw do that.
Yeah, my dad, I remember growing up, he used to hate it. He used to complain about drivers who did it, but I agree with it because I think at this point it's a safety issue. And I think if you can save your wrist, what's the point of risking it?
Oh yeah, and your thumbs, anything that can, get caught in the wheel spokes there, especially with this rack and pinion steering now. These race cars are a lot more difficult to control when they hit the wall. So definitely, take your hands off the wheel. We're headed to Vegas. Danica's last race in the IndyCar series took place in Vegas where Dan Weldon was killed. Hard to believe that was where are we at now? Almost 14 years ago. So, Vegas, it can be a brutal racetrack for sure. RIP Dan Weldon in the IndyCar series. But on, going back to the Cup side, look, Josh Berry won this race a year ago, last spring. Got out there with the Wood brothers, got his win. I think he kind of got to look at him. Daniel Suarez has been surprising me. He finished P2 there last year. He's been running really, really well with Spire so far. Got caught up in some of the mess, but he's had a lot more speed than I was expecting to see. And then Denny Hamlin, of course, won this race in the fall. So I think we talk about all the time our meat and potato guys, the mile and a halfs. We always think Hendrick, Penske, and Gibbs, but now I almost think you got to bring in the track houses, the Spires. We're starting to see some guys have speed and can go up and lead laps. Front row motorsports. Zane Smith, what's he going to be able to do? Had a rough week in Phoenix. Can he rebound on the mile and a half?
2311, man, you got to keep an eye out on them too. But before we move on to Phoenix, or yeah, before we move on to Las Vegas, 100%, I did see something that just made me laugh today because I saw that Noah Gragson had started dating the sister of Connor Zilic, and it kind of reminded me of Ryan Blaney's sister dating William Byron.
And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think that ended well.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
they're not together anymore. That's what goes on. Everyone's just dating everyone's siblings. Like, what is going on with that?
Well, hey, Ricky Spenhouse, he of course he spun out in this race too. Was dating Dana Patrick for a while. So yeah,
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
just a bunch of fun. But yeah, let's move it on to Las Vegas. I know it's going to be a fun track. We always like Vegas. We're back out there in the wild wild west, as I like to call it. It's an interesting track because we got all four turns are 20% baking, and all the front stretch and the back stretch are at 9%.
Yeah, which is kind of a sister track to like a Kansas, right? We think some of the mile and a halves, Atlanta, obviously super speedway, Texas is a quad oval, Charlotte kind of mirrors that. So Vegas kind of has its own Kansas feel to it, banking a little bit different, of course. It's going to take consistency, no mistakes on pit road. We're going to see who's fast. I feel like whoever unloads fast, qualifies well, is going to be our top 10 drivers, but we'll see. This is it's a new season. We have drivers up here that we haven't been talking about before. Sky mentioned Eric Jones earlier. Can we see Legacy Motor Club start to, flex their muscles? I think RFK is still kind of some sleeper picks as well. Ryan Preece, Chris Buescher. When is BK? His leg is just about back to 100%. Is BK going to get up there and shake things up? It's tough to say, guys.
And I don't know if we know yet if Bowman's going to be back in the car or not for Vegas, but the 48, both races last year in Vegas finished top 10. He finished seventh. So if he is back in the car, I mean, this would be a really good track for him to maybe not win, but start to, get back on track, get the ball rolling, finish really well here, gain some points, and just start getting out of that hole.
All right, guys, we're just about out of time. So you know what that means. We got to make our picks for next week. Who are you taking, Kevin?
All right, I'll go first. I'm going to go with the 19 of Chase Briscoe. I think this is going to be a JGR kind of weekend. I think Denny Hamlin would be a great pick as well. But I think the 19, he's had a couple bad weeks. He's deep in the points. This is where he digs down and finds victory lane.
Okay, Sky, what are you thinking?
Briscoe's a really good choice. Honestly, the guys don't make fun of me, but I'm going with the 22. I feel like he's got a new fire, or maybe it's the lack of hair. I don't really know, but I feel like he's going to get it done in Vegas.
Well, that's a good pick as well. I'm going to go opposite both y'all. I am going to go with the 24 of William Byron. He took a P4 there week. I think he did a hell of a job this weekend in Phoenix. So I'm going with the 24, guys.
It's a good pick. I'm surprised you didn't take Larson. Larson led a lot of laps there last year. I think those guys.
You took Larson for me when I was out last week, and that was a good pick. So I got P3. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great fantasy picks as well. And don't sleep on the mustache. Ryan Blaney is making magic with the stash. He's doing something with it. I do think the 12.
Love the stash.
I love the stash. It's fantastic. So we'll see. Vegas is going to be, it's going to be a battle. We got the Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube, Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Sunday, 4 Eastern. It's going to be a great race, guys. I love Vegas. Time to roll the dice, see where we stack up. Our first real mile and a half of the season. We'll be back next Monday night to break down all of the action from Vegas. Be sure to follow us on all social media platforms across the board at Mash the Gas. Be sure to follow NASCAR Sky at NASCAR Sky. And until then, y'all.
Mash the gas.